Dr. Cheryl Pearson was a doctor for kids, and she was really good at it. She went to medical school after studying chemical engineering in college. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, and she was really close to her family. One Friday night in January 2002, when she was 37, she went to watch a basketball game of the Grizzlies at the Pyramid in downtown Memphis. She had a ticket for all the games, and she went alone. She talked to her family on the phone while she was still at the game. Around 10:30 p.m., she drove from the game to her house on Daybreak Drive in a place called Bartlett, Tennessee. When she got home, 2 of her friends came over. They said she seemed fine and was excited to hang out with her sister's kids the next day while her sister was at work. Her friends left around 1 a.m. on January 5th. When her sister, Lorinda, came in the morning to drop off her kids, Dr. Pearson wasn't home and her car was missing. Lorinda was worried that something had happened to her sister, especially because she had severe diabetes. She thought maybe her blood sugar had gotten too high, and she might have driven off without realizing what she was doing, and maybe even had a car accident. All of the medicines and supplies Dr. Pearson needed to manage her disease were left in her home, as was her pager, which she needed as she was on call. Lorinda called the police. 2 days later, on January 7th, Dr. Pearson's blue 2001 Audi was found parked in the Quail Ridge apartment complex, which was on the other side of the golf course Dr. Pearson's street bordered. Police found the ticket stub from the Grizzlies game, the keys to the car, and a bank envelope with $140 in $20 bills. In the trunk of the car was another set of keys and Dr. Pearson's medical bag. The most telling detail from the examination of the car was the complete absence of fingerprints found inside of it. Since not even Dr. Pearson's prints were found inside the car, police inferred that the car had been wiped down to destroy fingerprint evidence, which implied that foul play was involved in the doctor's disappearance. The only connection Dr. Pearson had to the criminal world was her brother-in-law, Chuck Hillbreath, who was facing bank robbery charges at the time of Dr. Pearson's disappearance. Chuck was married to Dr. Pearson's sister, Lorinda, and was the father of the children Dr. Pearson had been planning to spend January 5th with. Chuck and Lorinda were having financial problems, which raised concerns that Dr. Pearson's $150,000 life insurance policy may have been a motive for Chuck to harm her. Lorinda was the beneficiary of the policy, with the money intended to provide for her children. Chuck was thoroughly investigated and interviewed multiple times by the Bartlett police. He provided an alibi for the night his sister-in-law vanished, which was picked apart by police but ultimately accepted. Furthermore, since Dr. Pearson's body was not found, she was not immediately declared dead, so the life insurance policy was not paid out. If Dr. Pearson had been killed for insurance money, her body was hidden too well for the plan to actually succeed. Police examined Dr. Pearson's phone records and found that someone had called her home at 1:58 a.m. Reports from around the time Dr. Pearson went missing say that this call was only 5 seconds long. But in 2016, the police reported that it was in fact just under 2 minutes long. The call was traced to a payphone at a Citgo gas station not far from Daybreak Drive. The payphone had been wiped of fingerprints, and there were no surveillance cameras covering the area. The caller has never been identified. Since there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry at Dr. Pearson's home, it appears that she was somehow convinced to leave her home in a hurry, rather than being abducted from inside her home. Unfortunately, when Dr. Pearson's mother arrived at her home after learning her daughter was missing, she cleaned up around the house, potentially inadvertently destroying evidence in the case. Dr. Pearson was legally declared dead in 2009, the same year her father, Leon, passed away. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. Padam Risal was born in Bhutan and lived there until his family was expelled from the country in 1990. He then spent time living in a refugee camp in Nepal. This is where his activism on behalf of the refugee community first began. He worked for the United Nations Refugee Agency's project for Bhutanese refugees, training teachers and enacting programs. Padam was eventually able to emigrate to the United States, where he helped create Bhutanese community organizations in both California and Washington state before moving to the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area. There, he was a successful entrepreneur, owning several businesses, and continued his work serving the Bhutanese and Nepali communities, both in his own community and around the world. He was also named to Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolfe's Advisory Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs. On February 21, 2019, Padam left his home in Susquehanna Township, Pennsylvania around 2 p.m. He was scheduled to meet his family at 7 p.m. that evening, but never arrived as planned. His family was alarmed and called numerous other family members and friends in search of him, but no one had seen him. The following morning, they reported him missing to the police. In the early hours of February 22nd, at approximately 1 a.m., Padam's silver Kia Forte was found abandoned on Interstate 83 on the overpass for the South Bridge, which spans the Susquehanna River in Harrisburg. There was no sign of Padam with the car or in the area. On March 11th, Padam's children and members of Harrisburg's Bhutanese community announced a $10,000 reward for information about Padam's whereabouts. They also implored anyone who has seen him since February 21st to come forward. They are particularly interested in anyone who may have seen him after 2 p.m. on that day, as that information would help create a timeline of his actions that afternoon. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Dale Dinwiddie was a graduate of Randolph-Macon Women's College with a bachelor's degree in art history. Following her graduation from college, she was living at home with her parents in Columbia, South Carolina, and working as a full-time babysitter while she prepared to enroll at the University of South Carolina for graduate school. On September 23, 1992, 23-year-old Dale attended a U2 concert at the William Spray Stadium with a group of friends. When the concert ended at approximately 11:15 p.m., the group traveled to the Five Points area of Columbia to go to Jungle Jim's, a popular bar. Inside the bar, Dale at some point got separated from her group of friends. Not being able to find her immediately, her friends all assumed that Dale had gotten another ride home. They had all traveled to the concert and then to the bar in several cars, so everyone assumed that she had left in someone else's car. They all left the bar, leaving Dale there alone, around 1 a.m. on September 24th. 15 minutes later, Dale approached the bouncer at the door to ask if he had seen her group of friends. After talking with the bouncer for about 15 minutes, Dale walked outside and began walking north on Hardin Street. The bouncer would be the last person to ever see her. At 6:15 a.m., Dale's father went into her room because her clock radio alarm had sounded and she had not turned it off. Dale was not in the room and he realized that her bed had not been slept in. After calling around to her friends to see if anyone knew where she was, Dale's parents reported her missing at 8:30 a.m. Missing persons flyers were up around Columbia within hours of Dale's disappearance being discovered. Within a week, the search effort for her had a command center and a phone bank. Her parents had appeared on national media outlets begging for information, and her flyers were up in every state in the nation. There were hundreds of volunteers in the efforts, including local students, as well as truckers, who volunteered to transport Dale's flyers across the country. Dale's disappearance was classified by law enforcement as an abduction, so as to qualify it for assistance from the FBI. U2 displayed Dale's picture at several of their subsequent concerts after learning she had gone missing. The publicity generated thousands of leads, but no answers. In 2012, just 6 weeks shy of the 20th anniversary of Dale's disappearance, authorities released an age-progressed image of what Dale would potentially look like at the age of 43. Dale's family and friends continue to publicize her case in hopes of generating a lead that will help them finally find Dale. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. In 1967, Susan Galvin, who was 20 years old, had moved from Spokane, Washington to Seattle not long ago. She'd been living there for about a year and had a job as a records clerk with the Seattle Police Department. She worked the late-night shift, but on July 9th, Susan didn't come to work. Susan's body was discovered in an elevator in a parking garage off of Mercer Street. She had been raped and strangled. The parking garage was located at the Seattle Center, a 74-acre tourism and entertainment area originally constructed for the 1962 World's Fair and home to Seattle's famous Space Needle. Susan was known to spend a lot of her free time around the center. Police hypothesized that she had been in the parking garage because she was about to leave and go to work when she was attacked. Police tested for fingerprints, canvassed the area, and interviewed dozens of people as part of their investigation. They were only ever able to identify one real suspect, a professional clown named Punchy. Susan had been seen with Punchy a few hours prior to her death in the area of the Seattle Center currently known as the Armory. There are also reports that she had been seen with him a few days before the 9th as well. Punchy had also quit his job just a few days after Susan was killed. The clown was never charged, however, due to a lack of evidence. Susan's case went cold, but efforts were made to solve it over the years as new technology emerged. In 2002, the clothes Susan had been wearing at the time of her murder, which were still preserved in evidence, were re-examined in hopes of finding new evidence. The effort resulted in the discovery of DNA evidence on the clothing. Unfortunately, there were no matches to the DNA profile in any police database. The DNA did answer one lingering question in the case, however. In 2016, the case was reassigned to Seattle Police Detective Rolf Norton. Detective Norton was able to track down the man who had worked as Punchy the Clown, who was then living in Utah. He provided a DNA sample to the police. His DNA was not a match to the profile discovered on Susan's clothing, and he was finally clear of suspicion in the murder. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, the alleged Golden State Killer, gave Detective Norton new hope of using the so far unidentified DNA to catch Susan's killer. In the summer of 2018, he sent the DNA to Parbon Nanolabs in Virginia to use genetic genealogy to try to identify a suspect in the case. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore uploaded the profile to GEDmatch, an open-source genetic genealogy database, and discovered several very distant relatives of the killer. There were 2 distant cousins amongst them that she found to be the killer's closest relatives in the database, sharing just 2% of their DNA with him. Moore then began the process of building these individuals' family trees. She discovered the most recent common ancestors that the 2 individuals she found in GEDmatch shared with the contributor of the DNA at the crime scene, a couple comprised of a man born in Kentucky in 1828 and a woman born in Missouri in 1837. Using public records to trace their descendants through the decades, Moore eventually identified a suspect from Seattle. By the time he was identified, this suspect had already passed away. Seattle police contacted his family and obtained a DNA sample from one of his relatives to confirm that they shared a familial relationship with the suspect. When those results confirmed that the police were looking at the right family, they received permission to exhume the potential suspect's body. The exhumation from a graveyard in Tukwila, Washington, occurred in early 2019. DNA extracted from the exhumed bones confirmed that the suspect's DNA matched that found on Susan's clothing. Susan's case then became the oldest case ever solved by the use of genetic genealogy so far. On May 7, 2019, just 2 months shy of the 52nd anniversary of Susan's murder, the Seattle Police Department held a press conference during which Detective Norton announced that Susan's killer was a man named Frank Whippich. In 1967, Whippich had been a 26-year-old married father of 1. He and his wife had a second child 2 years later and then divorced in 1971. He worked as a security guard, and while he may have worked security at the Seattle Center at the time of the murder, this has not been confirmed. His only criminal conviction for larceny occurred the same year he and his wife divorced, and he served 9 months in prison in relation to it. Whippich was arrested one more time for a weapons offense in 1975. Seattle police have since lost the records for this arrest, but according to Whippich's family, It stemmed from him impersonating a police officer. He would make traffic stops dressed in a uniform armed with a gun. He did not serve time in prison in connection with this arrest. Whippich died in 1987 due to complications from diabetes. Cooperated with the police during the investigation into Susan's murder, despite their shock at Frank's involvement with the case. Whippich had served in the Army in the early 1960s and had been stationed in Germany, New York, and Alaska. Investigators are now looking into unsolved cases in those areas from the times Whippich had been in each one of them to see if he may have been involved in any of those crimes as well. None of the original detectives on Susan's case were still alive to see it solved. But Detective Norton attributes his ability to solve the case with new technology to their efforts in 1967. Having a viable DNA sample that has not degraded to the point of being unusable after so much time is very rare. The DNA in this case only remained because of the professionalism and attention to detail shown by the original detectives in their collection and proper storage of the evidence at the time of the murder. The case is considered solved by the Seattle police. And according to Detective Norton, in his own words, Frank Whippich is 100% certain to be the murderer of Susan Galvin. However, the fact that Frank Whippich is deceased technically leaves the case in limbo. While the case is solved with the identification of Whippich as the killer, Whippich is still innocent of the crime. Since he cannot be given the opportunity to defend himself at trial, and he cannot be convicted in a court of law, he must be considered innocent. While this is an important legal distinction, Whippich's identification is still significant to Detective Norton. We are not able to punish him with incarceration, but history will hold him accountable, Norton told Cairo 7 News. We know he is the murderer of Susan Galvin, and that will be his defining characteristic. While the discovery of Whippich's identity will not result in any criminal charges, it does at least answer some of the questions that have haunted Susan's family, including her 7 siblings, for the past 52 years. Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best presented Chris Galvin, who had just been 6 years old at the time of his older sister's death, with the American flag that had been flying over the Seattle Justice Center the day Susan's case was solved, at the news conference announcing the resolution to the case. Another one of Susan's brothers, Larry Galvin, sent a statement to the conference from his home in Florida. 52 years later, we learn the who, but still have no clear understanding as to the why Larry wrote. There will always be that lingering question. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. On May 15, 2006, Aju Iruaga was almost 26, just 2 days away from his birthday, but he wasn't in a celebratory mood. He had come back to Canada early from a family trip to Nigeria, where his parents were born, to start a summer job with the A&M Reforestation Agency in Sudbury, Ontario. His job was as a tree planter, and his work site was quite remote. The camp where he stayed was 5 miles west of a small town, and the actual planting sites, where he worked with jack pine and black spruce seedlings, were even farther, about 40 miles into the wilderness from the camp. The environment was cool, damp, and isolated. The work was physically demanding and taxing. Aju had spent the previous summer doing the same job, so he was prepared for the atmosphere and the hard work. A third-year engineering student at McMaster University, he worked this job to finance his education, something he took very seriously. This year was not going as successfully as his first year, however. May 15th was only Aju's second day of work for the year, and it opened with his arguing with his supervisor on the bus ride from base camp out to the day's remote work site. Aju spent the morning planting a track of seedlings, but got into another disagreement with his supervisor when the crew took a break for lunch around noon. Aju's supervisor told him that he had done a poor job and would need to replant the entire track of seedlings he had spent the morning planting. Aju disagreed and took offense to the notion that, as someone who was very detail-oriented and had spent the entire previous summer doing the same task, he had done sloppy work. Aju was so angry that he quit his job, effective immediately. Aju asked for a ride back to the base camp so that he could collect his things and prepare to go back to his home in Toronto. He was told that no one could give him a ride back to camp, and that he would have to wait until 6 p.m. to ride the bus back with the rest of the crew when they finished work for the day. He was told to wait at the intersection of 2 remote gravel logging roads until he could travel back with the rest of the crew. He was seen waiting there by at least 10 other workers throughout the afternoon, the last time being at 3:45. At 4:05, someone passed the intersection, but Aju was no longer there. Sometime in those 20 minutes, Aju vanished. He has not been seen since. There were no clues of any sort left at the intersection, suggesting what may have become of Aju. After Aju's crew headed back to camp without him at 6 p.m., supervisors from A&M Reforestation drove up and down the logging roads around where he was last seen, honking their horns and calling his name. At 9 p.m., the Ontario Provincial Police out of White River were called. They did not arrive to the base camp until 11 p.m. when it was too dark for them to search the woods. They therefore took a few notes and called the emergency response team to prepare for a search in the morning. 2 A&M supervisors spent the night in a truck near the intersection where Aju had last been seen. The search the next day involved 2 police helicopters, 1 volunteer helicopter, 18 members of the emergency response team, 7 volunteers from the city of Sault Ste. Marie, and 3 Ontario Provincial Police canine units, also from Sault Ste. Marie. The search ran until early in the evening, but found no evidence of Aju or any leads to follow. With the day's search being unsuccessful, the decision was made to contact Aju's family. At 2 a.m. on May 17th, Aju's 26th birthday, Aju's parents received a phone call telling them that their youngest son was missing. Aju's father, Nawab, made it to the camp on May 19th, and Aju's brother was able to join him the following day. At the base camp, they were given Aju's possessions. These included basic items like the clothing he had brought with him for the summer, but also items that seemingly eliminated any hope that Aju had somehow made it back to camp and then headed home. In Aju's camp locker had been his wallet, his driver's license, his phone card, his social insurance card, and both his Canadian and Nigerian passports. The search for Aju in the wilderness went on for a week, but was called off on May 22nd, having found absolutely nothing. Within a few weeks of Aju going missing, his case was considered open but inactive by the Ontario Provincial Police. Since no sign of Aju or a potential path he may have taken was found in the woods, it has been the belief of his family that he was somehow taken out of the area. This could have occurred in several different scenarios. In some of these scenarios, Aju left the area willingly, and in some, he did not. Aju was in excellent physical shape and was a trained distance runner, known to sprint along 18 miles of the logging roads each morning before being sent out to plant trees. It would not necessarily be impossible for him to have traveled on foot the 40 miles along the access road that would take him to the Trans-Canada Highway to try to hitchhike, either back to camp or to some other destination of his choosing. That being said, if he planned to do that, why did he wait 4 hours to start the journey? By that time, waiting for the bus directly back to the base camp, where he would have had to go to retrieve his documents, would have been much quicker. It was also beginning to get dark at 4 o'clock, making the foot journey much more dangerous than it would have been if he had left midday. Even assuming that Aju did get impatient and tried to make it out of the woods on his own, he either got lost on the way, met with foul play at the hands of someone who gave him a ride, or successfully got out of the remote area and went off to start a new life in secret. The first scenario seems unlikely, given the complete lack of evidence and the extensive search. The second is possible, but as of now has no supporting evidence, and the third has its own set of problems. Aji was very close with his family and would not have put them through the heartache of not knowing where he was willingly. While this is a sentiment often expressed when a person goes missing, it is a sentiment and hard to evaluate or prove objectively. In Aju's case, however, there are solid facts that discredit this theory. Aji did have a desire to dramatically change his living situation. Aju had expressed interest in returning to live in Nigeria because of the calming effect being in the village of his father's birth had on his mental health. He was also highly respected in the village. The village did not have running water, and during the times Aju spent there, he would leave early in the mornings with a wheelbarrow to collect water in a nearby stream for the elderly and infirm. Since Aju's dream of starting over was so specific, it is easier to evaluate if he decided to abandon his current life willingly. If Aju decided to make his dream a reality after quitting his job, he would have needed to go back to the camp to get his passports in order to travel internationally. Since he could not hitchhike or walk to Africa, He would also have needed money for a plane ticket, but his bank accounts were not touched after he went missing. Given that Aju also had extended family back in Nigeria and his immediate family traveled there regularly, he would have been discovered even if he did somehow covertly make it back to his father's village. The Oroaga family's dual ties to both Nigeria and Canada began in 1968, when Aju's father Nwab came to Canada from Nigeria to study at the University of Waterloo. His plan was to bring his wife and infant daughter there after he was settled. But a civil war in Nigeria escalated soon after he arrived in Canada and threatened his dreams of reuniting with them. After more than a year of not being able to contact his family, Nwab was finally able to bring them to Canada. The Oroagas then had 4 more children, with Aju being the youngest, and Nwab ultimately became a college professor. The family divided their time between Canada and Nigeria. These stretches in each country could span several years. Aju attended primary school in Nigeria and struggled to adapt when the family returned to Canada. He was taunted in his junior high school outside of Toronto for his accent and his slender build, and he told his parents he wanted to return to Nigeria. The stress ultimately impacted his behavior. At first, he became withdrawn, but then he developed a temper. He got into a violent altercation with a classmate over a basketball while he was in high school. Following this incident, Audrey redirected all of his energy into excelling academically. This plan worked both because it contained his temper and also because it got him offers of admission to multiple universities. His temper did get out of control again in his second year at McMaster, when he got into a fight with another student in his dorm after a disagreement. Aju ended up spending a month in prison. Again, he took responsibility for his actions and took steps to prevent such behavior in the future. He took anger management classes, began practicing yoga, and started eating a vegetarian diet in hopes of improving his coping skills. This was also when he began running more seriously, as well as composing music to give himself new outlets for his emotions and energy. Aju's supervisor managed to get through all these defenses Aju had built up and bring out some of his temper. However, despite the fact that Aju got into these arguments the day he disappeared, his behavior does seem to show that his anger management skills were improving. While quitting his job may seem rash, it can also be argued that it was a good decision for Aju to make. If he and his supervisor were going to continue to argue all summer, it may have been best for Aju to remove himself from the situation before tension could build to the point where he would lash out. Furthermore, Aju seemed calm according to those who saw him standing at the intersection for those 4 hours just prior to his disappearance. He even reportedly waved or gave a thumbs up to one of his supervisors during this time he was waiting, indicating that his mood had calmed. This analysis is based on what the company says happened the day Aju disappeared, based on notes from the company's supervisors. All of the information we have about the day Aju disappeared is potentially suspect. It is possible that the argument escalated at the worksite or was rekindled several hours later as Aju was waiting by the road and resulted in Aju meeting with foul play. The company's account perhaps should be looked at with some skepticism. When viewed through the context of when and how it was recorded, and when and how the investigation into Aju's disappearance was handled as a whole. The only reason for any sort of investigation into Aju's disappearance after May of 2006 was the dedicated efforts of the Oroaga family and the private investigators they hired in June 2006. The position of the Ontario Provincial Police from the beginning was that Aju had wandered off and gotten lost in the woods, and they did not perform any of the basic investigative tasks normally performed in a missing persons case, where any number of scenarios could have resulted in the disappearance of the individual. There were no photos taken at the worksite, the site was not searched, the names of the other members of Aju's crew were not so much as recorded, and the witnesses in the case were not interviewed. The supervisor Aju had gotten into the fights with on the day he disappeared was not even interviewed by police until October 2007, almost a year and a half after Aju vanished. In this interview, she claimed to have not argued with Aju at all on the day he vanished. This was a striking reversal of the previous narrative of May 15, 2006, but when the police accept this fact, the Ontario Provincial Police have resisted the attempts of the Oroagas to have the case reactivated, stating that they will not move forward with the case unless new information is discovered, indicating that a crime was committed in it. Almost all of that potential evidence was lost the day Aju disappeared, when they chose not to try to collect it. In 2008, the Oroaga family publicly appealed to the provincial government of Ontario to open a coroner's inquest into Aju's case and for a new search in an extended area. They believe the initial search was not carried out in the correct area, which is why no sign of their son was found. They also called for the Ministry of Labor to investigate the safety practices of the reforestation firms that recruited university students. These efforts did not result in any advancement in Aju's case. While Aju's parents believe that their son is no longer alive, they struggle with the lack of answers about what happened to him. They hope to one day be able to provide their youngest child with a proper burial. What do you think about it? Tell us your thoughts in comments below. Let's continue. Margaret Ellen Fox lived in Burlington, New Jersey with her parents and 4 brothers. In 1974, the 14-year-old graduated from St. Paul's Roman Catholic School and was looking forward to starting high school in the fall. That summer, one of her cousins, Lynn Parks, was looking to work as a babysitter while school was not in session. She placed an ad in the classified section of a local newspaper and received a reply from a man claiming his name was John Marshall. He told Lynn that he lived in the nearby town of Mount Holly and needed someone to watch his 5-year-old son from 9:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., 5 days a week. He would pay her $40 a week, in addition to bus fare, to watch the boy at his house, which he said had a pool and a swing set to help keep the child entertained. Lynn's parents refused to let her take the job since it was out of town, so she gave John Marshall's name and phone number to Margaret, in case she wanted to earn spending money over the summer. Margaret called John Marshall on June 19th and agreed to start work 2 days later. That morning, she was supposed to take the bus to the stop at High and Mill Streets in Mount Holly, where he would pick her up in his red Volkswagen. The following day, however, John Marshall called the Fox home again. Margaret was not home, so he spoke to her father David instead. According to David, John told him that there had been a death in his family and he would not need Margaret to start the babysitting job until the following Monday, June 24th. David, who was very protective of his children, did his best to extend the conversation so that he could get a better read of the man who was hiring his daughter. Since he did not pick up on any red flags during the conversation, and because the job would only be during the day, he allowed Margaret to take the position. Walked to the bus stop. Joe watched Margaret board the 840 bus and then went home. Witnesses would later report seeing Margaret get off the bus in Mount Holly. Margaret had been instructed by her parents to call home when she arrived at John Marshall's house. The call never came. When Margaret failed to call, her parents began trying to get in touch with her. Margaret had left notes by the phone that she had been jotting down during her conversations with John Marshall. Her parents found the phone number John had provided and tried calling it. There was no answer. David Fox called a friend who was on the police force in East Ampton Township, just east of Mount Holly, and the 2 men began searching the streets of Mount Holly for any sign of Margaret. Back in Burlington, neighbors of the Foxes began organizing search teams as well. None of them found any sign of Margaret. The police would not accept a missing persons report the same day Margaret was last seen, so David Fox was at the police station at midnight to file one as soon as it was June 25th. On June 28th, the Foxes received a phone call demanding $10,000 for Margaret's safe return. This came the day after Margaret's disappearance was first reported in the local media. The next day, they received a letter with the same demand. Margaret's parents rushed to get the cash together, but they never received any instructions on how to deliver it. They did receive another letter 2 days after the first, calling off the exchange. Given the fact that these demands did not come until after Margaret's case had become more widely known, it is quite possible that the call and the letters were hoaxes. The second letter was also signed so as to indicate that it came from the SLA, a group which was heavily featured in the national news at the time, but was not active in New Jersey, furthering suspicion that it was not really from whoever had Margaret. The phone number Margaret had been given by the man calling himself John Marshall was traced back to a payphone outside of an A&P grocery store in Lumberton, New Jersey. There was a man named John Marshall who worked at the store and who was therefore questioned by police. He passed a polygraph exam, which is not conclusive evidence, but he was also working at the store the day Margaret disappeared, and had coworkers who could confirm that he was there. Since John and Marshall are both very common names, it is unclear if the caller had coincidentally made up this alias on his own, or if he had been trying to implicate the store employee. Men named John Marshall who lived in the area were interviewed by police, as were people who owned red Volkswagens. The FBI compared fingerprints found on the letters sent to the Foxes to the limited pool of fingerprints they had on file at the time. David Fox kept pictures of Margaret in flyers with information about her case taped in the window of his car to spread the word about her disappearance wherever he went. He also went to church every day to pray for his daughter's return. There was a confession in the case in 1976, but it proved to be a hoax. John Marshall was never identified, and Margaret has never been found. Margaret's parents have both since passed away, but her brothers continue to hope for resolution in her case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.